Well, welcome everybody to our Legend of Zelda panel. I am Zach Wojtowicz, and I'm the administrator of the Hidden Triforce, and I'm also the host and producer for our podcast called Smashing Podcast, where you can find us on Facebook and on SoundCloud. And yes, we'll be talking about the future of the Legend of Zelda series, where it will be going after Breath of the Wild, or if they're going to go back to the traditional dungeon crawler, and yeah, we'll see what happens from there on.
My name is Nate. I go by KirbyVolt online. I'm just kind of a small-time Let's Player. I really like the Legend of Zelda series, so I was asked to help out for this panel, so that's why I'm here.
Well, thank you very much for helping me out, Nate.
Thank you.
I wouldn't want to be the only one up here talking to myself. But yes, this is also an open discussion, so if anybody has any questions or would like to put in their input for the Zelda series, then please do. So, one thing that I would like to discuss is if Nintendo will be using Breath of the Wild as sort of the framework for the next Zelda title, if they're going to keep it that massive open world setting, and hopefully not weapon degradation, unless if they have put in like a smithy or something, or are they going to go back to sort of the dungeon crawling, more linear gameplay? Personally, myself, I would like to see them keep this style of open world and no hand-holding. Once you start, you can even go to the final boss. I would certainly like to see that in future Zelda titles. So,
I'm pretty open to whatever they want to do. I really enjoyed this. This is my favorite Zelda game now, for sure. I actually like that you had that intro bit just to get the runes and whatnot, because I think that helped a lot with the exploration once you finally got into the rest of the world. Weapon degradation is a weird thing. I'm not sure where I stand on that. I kind of, at this point, really don't care. But if they make it really awful, then I'll hate it. But I don't really hate it per se. I don't find it amazing either. So I'd be really cool to see them do another game similar to this. And I feel like that's something that they probably would do, just based on the fact that when you think about it, the first game, the original from '86, that a lot of the games that came after that were kind of based off that one. Ocarina of Time came out, and most of the Zelda games following that were kind of based on that. And I feel like this one, since they kind of went and broke a lot of the rules that they had previously for a lot of Zelda games, they might try to use this format again, kind of what they've done, but they have a precedence for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they sort of, I liked how they scrapped everything that we know and love about Zelda. They essentially scrapped and brought in, well, essentially what would be considered in the first Zelda game, whereas open world, you had no set destination, you just went wherever you could go. Mm-hmm. And I kind of would like to see it be kept like this, giving us that amount of freedom, and even in the story as well. Personally, I would like to see a follow-up to Breath of the Wild, sort of like with Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, how those were essentially as close as direct sequels as you could get. I would like to see a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, because I felt that the ending was more deserving on a conclusion. It didn't feel like it really concluded. Just left myself open for more questions, and I would like to see a follow-up title that takes place right after Breath of the Wild, instead of going into several generations later.
Yeah, I want to see follow-up titles, because there's a lot of characters that are introduced in Breath of the Wild, and they get axed off. And I feel like, it's the Zelda series. Maybe there's a way to revive them. I don't know. But I think there's a lot of cool character potential that I'd really like to see more from those. In terms of the gameplay design, I like the open world aspect, but I'm actually not a big fan of the original Zelda. I hate that it's too open world, that it's like you don't know what to do. So I like the idea of still having some kind of missions in there, so you have some guidance of where you should be going, if you need guidance. Otherwise, if you want to play around, by all means.
Breath of the Wild is by no means cryptic. It's less cryptic than the very first Zelda game.
For sure.
So you at least have a set destination on where to go in terms of quests, or see a shattered wall, to blow it up with a bomb. So that's one thing that doesn't make it as cryptic as the first Zelda game. But in keeping with the open world and this new gameplay style, I would also like to see Nintendo probably bring back original dungeons from the older series. So perhaps keep the open world, but also include the dungeons that we would go and explore and find the items that we needed, defeat the boss, get a new item, or get the special item that we would need to progress in the game. So that I would kind of like to see, because that would be interesting to see how massive they could make the dungeons, and how tedious they could possibly make the water dungeon. At least that's my fear. But so far there hasn't really been any water temples in Breath of the Wild, which is kind of refreshing.
There's the shrines and whatnot. I like the concept of the shrines. I feel like that was kind of the hard part. Is I really like those larger dungeons as well. But for how this game was built, we have all runes to start with. I feel like that was a much better approach, because the other game I can think of where you kind of have everything to start with is A Link Between Worlds. They don't have everything to start with. You have to get rupees to rent them. But I remember the dungeons in Link Between Worlds they're nice, but it's pretty much you find one, you buy one item, you have the item, and it solves every single puzzle for that dungeon. And it seems like, well, why do I have these other items? They don't seem as useful. So I'd really like to see more with how they did this. I think some of the divine beasts are built very well with how you would use the multiple items you already have. So I'd want to see more dungeons that can really utilize everything effectively, in addition to giving you that new weapon. So you can kind of feel accomplished that you're able to figure out some puzzles that maybe you didn't really think about because you forgot, oh yeah, I have this item that I've had forever that, oh yeah, I can do this thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps I'm still stuck in the open world, because I just love how ever since I played games like Skyrim, that's kind of what brought me into that RPG kind of setting, with doing whatever you want whenever you wanted in an open world and didn't really necessarily held your hand the entire time. But of course, one thing I would like to see is a world that's a lot more populated, with perhaps larger cities, towns, adding essentially more life to the world itself. Not that Breath of the Wild already has a lot of life, but it's more wilderness, a lot more isolated, something that has a lot more traffic going on in terms of cities, towns.
I mean, if you actually look at, they showed a lot of concept art for how they were approaching Breath of the Wild, because this game was in a lot of development before we even saw like the first preview back in 2014 or whenever that was. And their initial idea actually was kind of more of a futuristic setting, it seemed like, where they would have all these like really populated cities. And I'm not sure where the axe came down on that, whether or not they thought maybe this isn't a good fit, or if that came back from like maybe Miyamoto higher up, although he didn't have as much involvement with this game compared to previous ones. Maybe it was just like a suggestion of like, hey, make it similar to the first one, where, you know, it really is that lost in the forest thing, because that was kind of the concept of it. The original Zelda concept is Miyamoto remembers as a kid when he would go exploring into the forest and he'd find all these caves and what's in here, that's so creepy, and that's kind of how the original Zelda came about. So I think they really wanted to kind of try to express that again, but now on a much grander scale than what they could have done back in '86. And now that they've done that, yeah, I for sure would want to see more populated types of cities. Definitely with some of the kind of stuff that you would see like with Ocarina of Time, or even Wind Waker. While Wind Waker is like really spread out, there are lots of cool civilizations. So see all those like even more populated than what already are in this big giant world, to see them kind of roaming about. You already have some roaming characters in this game, so having more of those kind of about would be really cool to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they could throw in a working motorcycle into the game, then it wouldn't be too far-fetched for them to add larger cities or towns, especially perhaps more advanced towns, if they decide, in the game, in the lore itself, if the future generations of Hyrule decide to utilize the Sheikah technology within their own technology. But where was I going with that? I think in the following game, yes, in terms of the story, I would like for them to continue on with the story Breath of the Wild left off, because again, I still feel it's somewhat incomplete.
And they do have a precedence for that. I mean, Wind Waker had direct sequel, and Wind Waker's direct sequel technically had direct sequel too, so it's not like it's out of the ordinary for them to do that. So that would be cool to see another one, especially as a main console title.
Yeah. Well, especially since it's interesting because in this game, you know, there's not a whole lot of, disregarding the shrines, being that they're underground, I still find it strange that there's not a whole lot of cave system in Breath of the Wild, because that would be one aspect that I would like to see, would be some link of caves that you could go in and explore, perhaps to find, honestly, I would like to see something in terms of new Sheikah technology. Perhaps the Sheikah, because the Sheikah were very secretive, they could have built something awesome underground.
Well, they actually kind of hint at from some of the cutscenes that Zelda knows more about the Sheikah Slate. So it's kind of like now that she has it, it's like, what can it do that we don't know about yet?
So she probably would be. So she would have some idea of what could be out there to help them sort of bring back Hyrule's former glory.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would like to see that. And
may I have some input?
yes.
Okay, so like you said earlier, they might go off to just make future titles like this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? It might not necessarily be a direct sequel to it, but it would still have the same kind of gameplay mechanics that Breath of the Wild has.
I mean, in a way, I would be somewhat disappointed if it wasn't a direct sequel, because I feel that this game is going somewhere in the future. But if they were to go in a direction of taking place generations later or before, that wouldn't really bother me, because it's a Zelda game and Nintendo takes their time with the Zelda games. So I would still love to see it.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, I just love the story of this game, and I think some of the characters got gypped. That's the only reason why I want to see a sequel. But I think just the bike concept alone, for me, says, okay, this thing goes super fast. What if they made an even bigger world that could even accommodate this, so then you have this, like, really crazy world with just a bunch of things chasing you. I like the Guardian enemies just because it kind of gives you that thrill of, like, oh crap, here's this thing, and as you get better at the game, you kind of figure out how to combat them. And I think if you had more of that, and now you have this bike that's super fast, you have all these other things chasing you, I think that could be like a really fun action element to it.
Yeah, definitely keep more of the strategic aspect of Breath of the Wild, because you really had to think when engaging multiple enemies. Couldn't you just go in hacking and slashing like in some other Zelda games? So I like that element where you have to just stop and think if this is an enemy or group of enemies you can engage and be successful, or you're gonna have to come back later and rethink your strategy. So I'd like to see implements of that in future Zelda games, because how everything works in this game with the physics engine and the enemy AI, I would like to see that in future titles where it doesn't push you too hard at first. It eases you into it, and then at some point you'll eventually get the hang of.
Depends on where you go. I'm
Yeah,
going to
that's
Benchside
true.
Island. I have 3 hearts and I haven't gone anywhere else yet.
That's true. Of course, if you have 3 hearts and to go and fight a Lionel with a tree branch, you're not going to have much luck. So
Don't try Master Mode.
yeah. No, definitely not. I wasn't very successful, even though I tried, but I wasn't successful at all in that.
There's a silver Lino on the Great Plateau in Master Mode. It's just sitting there. It's just like, oh, okay, hi there.
It's just waiting for you to cross its path so it can just one-shot you. So, those are the type of things that I would like to see in the future Zelda title. Even if it wasn't a title that was a direct sequel or direct follow-up to Breath of the Wild, I would still like to see where Nintendo's going with it.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be giving Hyrule a bit more technological advancements that they can utilize in future titles.
Well, they've been working toward it.
Nintendo's always been kind of like that with their games. I mean, they always just try to throw in some like gimmick and see if it works. And I mean, with Breath of the Wild, they just went all out, and it works.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, they always like to take risks with their titles.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only do they take plenty of risks, but I just like it how they're always very careful with taking those risks as well, because they're pretty darn notorious for pushing the game back to different release dates to continue to work on them and really perfect them. So, with the next Zelda title, I'm pretty confident that they're gonna give it the same care and attention as they did with Breath of the Wild.
For sure.
And plus, because they most likely now have a better understanding of where the series could go from here. Hopefully it won't take another 5 years for us to wait for another Zelda title.
I mean,
Hopefully.
that has something to do with like consoles and whatnot too,
Mm-hmm.
because this was a Wii U title. This was supposed to be released in 2016, but when the Wii U was doing badly in sales, unfortunately, they kind of took the risk of let's delay this and make this a launch title for our next system.
Mm-hmm.
It works perfectly on the Wii U. I actually don't have it on the Switch. I have it on the Wii U, but. You can definitely tell in some areas that this was meant to be a Wii U game,
Mm-hmm.
and they clearly, the delay at the very end of this game was solely for putting on the Switch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, several years ago, Miyamoto also delayed Twilight Princess, and the same thing happened.
Yep.
It was on GameCube and Wii.
Yep, porting it from the GameCube, but then making it a launch title for the Wii. And
Only in the U.S. actually. That's the weird thing about it.
Really, only in the U.S.?
The U.S. was the only one to have as a launch title for the Wii. I think Australia got the Wii version later, and in Japan they released the GameCube and the Wii version on the same day.
Interesting strategy.
Yeah, I think that was a Nintendo of America strategy to really get the Wii to sell.
Well, considering that the Wii sold better than the Wii U, they probably thought the same thing by just releasing Breath of the Wild for the Wii U, but
I'll do it for everybody.
Yeah. But then decided to do it for the Switch. But now seeing that they know which console the next Zelda title is going to be on, it's not going to be as tricky. I don't think.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's one thing that actually bothered me is that there was some actually cool U features that I really wanted to see that they took out with it because they wanted to be the same game. There was going to be interactable map on the gamepad, and I was kind of sad they took that out, but it is what it is. So I think it'd be kind of cool to see what else they can utilize. The Joy-Cons themselves have some really cool technology in them, so it'd be really neat to see if they try to reuse some of the tech that they are attempting to do with like Skyward Sword or something, because now they kind of have that perfected. Additionally, did you know the Switch has a touchscreen?
Yeah. Oh, actually, no, I don't think
it does. Switch has a touchscreen if you take it off the dock. I don't know what they would use that for, but there's a lot of cool tech that they could be really utilizing to kind of really sell some interesting ideas for puzzle solving.
Because I haven't used the touchscreen on my Switch yet, so I had no. I was trying to figure out if it had touchscreen or not, but I just couldn't. I was just scratching my head the whole time, so I didn't know if it did or not.
It does. That's the weird thing about it, because when you think about like, well, I'm gonna have a dock most of the time. Why do I use it? Well, it's there if you want it. So
I guess it's just one of those extra added conveniences. It's not really much of a gimmick as it is like, oh, here you go, here's something extra.
For sure.
So, yeah. Anyone else have any questions at all?
No. I mean, well, I was wondering if like Nintendo tried to make. Well, okay. Maybe it's not just Nintendo, but the gaming industry in general. People kind of see this open world as kind of a trend now, ever since like Elder Scrolls, like as far back as Oblivion or even Morrowind. What do you think? Like, maybe not every game should have this, but Legend of Zelda, I mean, it works for me. So if they continue to do this, then and never go back to the traditional thing, like how would people react to that?
It could be a mixed bag because I'm not sure if some people preferred the traditional aspect of Legend of Zelda where you would be set on one point, but then of course going into the dungeons and then moving on to the next dungeon. Whereas in Breath of the Wild, it's literally nothing is holding your hand. You can go anywhere you want. Go to the final boss when you only have 3 hearts and a tree branch and see how you do against Ganon if you can get past the Guardians and the Lynels. So for that's definitely hit or miss because I was definitely more used to the more linear aspect of the Zelda series, despite the fact that I'm not a fan of linear gameplay in an RPG. Which is why I didn't like Skyward Sword that much, just because it was, once you went down to one part of the world, it was literally just, here's your starting point, and the end of the course is the temple. That's the one thing I didn't like about Skyward Sword. So I do hope that they continue to do the open world aspect for future Zelda titles, just because it fits the series itself, because the Zelda universe is very large and massive, that it deserves a world that's worth exploring instead of having so many boundaries that sets you on a certain path. So I'd rather have something that you can go off the beaten path and just explore wherever you please. That's what I would like to see in future Zelda titles.
And I agree with that pretty much. Like, I really love the concept of Skyward Sword. The linear thing does suck. That's why I'd want to see that tech used again, but now with more open world setting, because I think that'd be a lot more fun. I think there's limitations of the Wii, which is why they couldn't make it as big as they probably wanted to. But I'd want to see that kind of stuff come back. But then I think to your question, there's people who actually just hate 3D Zeldas, period, and they would only want to play another traditional 2D one. So I think it would be very bad if they did try to make more like that as well, just to kind of appeal to everyone, because some people really as much as this is great, and a lot of people love this, and I love this, I know there's some people who would say, screw this, A Link Between Worlds is the best game, or something like that.
Or you
yeah.
have A Link to the Past ones, because the people a lot of people who have been the most stingy about 3D Zelda games technically go towards A Link to the Past, at least in my experience. Even though Link to the Past is a great game, I love the 2D Zelda games that I've played, but the 3D titles more so, just because those titles I feel just give you a lot more freedom. So I guess in terms of the in-game content for those future Zelda titles, I didn't mind so much the weapon degradation. I know a lot of people did not like the weapon degradation, but in a way I didn't really mind it because it added that extra feel of survival. You got to plan out your attacks, and you got to figure out which is the best weapon to use against certain enemies, because you wouldn't want to use the Master... Okay, fine, use the Master Sword for cutting down trees. It'll just recharge in the next 10 minutes, but wouldn't want to use a high-power weapon against a low-level enemy, and so on. You got to make sure that the weapon that you have isn't going to break after 2 hits when fighting a Lionel. But the one thing that really irritated me was that there was no smithy. You couldn't actually go somewhere and fix your damaged weapons. That was the one thing that kind of disappointed me, because in the world of Legend of Zelda, where it's a very medieval time period, one would think you would have an area or an anvil or a smithy to restore your weapons or even craft new weapons. So I would like to see an element like that in a future Zelda title.
Got a dice shop.
Yeah, you can dye your clothes. That's one thing.
I think for me, like, I didn't mind that because there's so many weapons that there's always a point where I went, my inventory's full. I'd sort through like, here, screw this bone or something like that. So I never felt that there was a necessity for me to find something like that, because I'd always be like finding 3 weapons for every one I broke.
Yep. You're carrying 4 great swords and a spear, but you can't carry a stick.
Well, sucks be the stick. No, I'm gonna drop the spear, light the stick on fire, throw the stick, get the spear back. Okay, I'm good.
There you go. That's one way to go about it. Now, there's one thing that I would like to see, but I don't know what you would all think about this. I don't know if it might be going too close to Skyrim in that kind of manner, but I would like to see something along the lines of sort of like a skill tree, like you're able to have these different abilities. And of course, the more you do them, the more you progress in that ability, that you can level up to get a better version of that ability. I wouldn't know what type of stuff you can do, but perhaps like different, because of all the different weapons they have, perhaps different melee styles, or perhaps being able to craft stronger weapons so they wouldn't break as easily. Stuff like that. Craft better armor. I don't know if that's cutting too close to series like the Elder Scrolls, but that's just something that I feel that could possibly fit in the future Zelda title. Yes.
Well, even more than just the weapons, I think if they incorporated the different tools that you get, kind of like upgrading from hook shot to long shot or something like that, would make it not so much about the combat, but more about just the flexibility of different things you can do in the world too. That'd be very within the game series.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool to have some kind of level up system. I think for me, I've tried to get into Elder Scrolls games. I don't find them fun, so I wouldn't find that kind of stuff welcome in Zelda. I'd want to try to distance it from it. I'd want to try to like a level up system, but that makes sense for the Zelda series, not just kind of copying off what has already been done.
You know, now I've never played Breath of the Wild before, but like for dungeons.
We're not friends anymore, Tim. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
But for dungeons, is there a set way to solve puzzles in the dungeons?
Yes.
Or can you like find some exploit to just kind of,
kind of both?
Kind of yes and no. Sorry, Nate, go ahead.
Okay, so Breath of the Wild, there's shrines, and these are kind of like mini puzzle dungeons, and they basically have one way you do it, but you can find other ways to do it. Like what I was explaining earlier, there's a DLC one that wants you to do this like crazy complicated ball puzzle where it wants you to get these balls to fall down a certain way using this cascading waterfall, and you have to use this ice rune to get it to go in the right way. And eventually I got so frustrated with it, I realized I can walk up to that waterfall, you can climb the ice blocks. So I just climbed the ice blocks and carried the ball down to the switch where it needed to go, because I was just getting that frustrated with it. But In terms of like the actual dungeons, there are 4 main dungeons in the actual game. They are not required to beat the game, like most things in this game, but they do actually utilize some specific ways that they want you to solve things. However, if you are resourceful, you could be like, okay, this needs an electrical outlet. Do I actually hook it up to the electrical outlet it wants me to use, or do I have 50 lightning arrows that I can use to quickly solve this? So there's definitely some different strategies you can implement depending on what's calling for.
Yeah, and I know there's another, in one of the shrines, there's that, one of those physic puzzle with the, where you have to roll the ball in through this maze. You have to kind of move the maze and get the ball to the other side. I probably spent a good hour trying to get that until I gave up and I just flipped the thing over and made sure the ball was on the flat side and just flipped it over. I was convinced that was the only way you could do it because I was so tedious with how you move the maze, and I got to the end and I figured, okay, just give it a little tap and plummet right to the ground, start right over again.
And then that also kind of applies to the overworld as well. I think if you've seen any speedruns in this game, you'll know they really like this item that's the stasis rune. The stasis runes allow you to basically stop an object as it's in motion, and you can add momentum to it. So, you know, you could chop down a tree, stop it, hit it a bunch so it can get some more momentum to it, climb onto it, let it go, and then just fly across the entire high road.
There's a lot of creative things that you can do in this game, and just with that free reign of physics, I would just love to see that in future Zelda titles. I actually did see one instance where somebody was able to get, I think, like a metal box or one of the metal carts and sort of have another metal.
Oh yeah, because the game gets confused because you're sitting in a metal cart.
Yeah.
And the game considers there's another rune that allows you to magnet items up, so the carts are both metal. So you put one of them on top of the other, you're magneting the bottom one. The game gets confused because it doesn't register the fact that you're riding the bottom one, it registers the fact that you're riding the top one that's on the bottom, middle of the bottom one. So you can kind of use that as a basic flying machine to go anywhere.
That'd be an easy way to get to Ganon, because all you'd have to do, you just bypass all the Guardians and the Lionels and just get to...
If you've seen a speedrun, basically they find the right tree in the Great Plateau, they chop it down, they get it ready, they use it to basically, they jump in the air, have the tree hit them, and they fly straight into the loading zone for where Ganon is from the Great Plateau.
If they make a manga Breath of the Wild, that needs to be in there. That's the entrance that Link will use to get to Ganon. It's by using a tree with the stasis ability. I would love to see that.
Hey, remember back in the day, the fishing rod was Ganon's weakness.
Was oh.
Yeah,
That's Twilight
didn't-
Princess. Yeah, there was like a glitch where if you pull the fishing rod out during the fight with Ganondorf, for some reason he'll like go towards where the lure is.
I don't know if that was a glitch or if that was just an Easter egg, because they did it in Skyward Sword with the bug net as well.
The King of Evil can be defeated by a fishing rod.
I went the worm.
King Evil's can be beat by the most sarcastic bird ever.
And not to mention, all those times that you fight Phantom Ganon, you don't have to play tennis with him. You can just use the bottle. Instead of hitting him with you know how he always just throws that energy ball at you and you gotta bounce it back with your sword. You can actually just use the bottle to bounce it back.
Just
Way less epic.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
You were talking about how there's one thing that's missing from this game is like a crafting element.
Yeah.
And I was really glad that you brought that up because that was one of my favorite things about Skyward Sword. As weird as it was that you needed like butterfly wings and like Beetlejuice to like make your shield more powerful, but and you mentioned that that's really missing from this game. You're kind of worried that that would make it a little bit too like Skyrim-esque. And so I'm wondering like what are some things about this game that keep it separate from that? Like what about this game like retains its identity? So you can't just say, well, it's just the Zelda reboot of Skyrim.
It's just like it's like Skyrim with a Zelda skin essentially.
Right,
It's
right.
Skyrim.
But it's not because bland.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I suppose just simply because Zelda in itself is already a very well-defined world with its races, its people. I'd honestly say doing something like some sort of crafting element and making it that sort of fit in that Zelda universe. Something that's not just a simple anvil, but because I know that in the games, like some of these items can get kind of goofy. that that's a tough question actually to find out how it could find a way to be separate from Skyrim, because crafting in of itself isn't necessarily a Skyrim thing. It's in dozens and dozens of RPGs and game titles. I suppose as easily, like with other Zelda titles where you have a blacksmith who can temper your sword, you could have something similar like that, being a callback to A Link to the Past, have a blacksmithing being able to either temper the master's sword or help you craft items or craft weapons. You just bring them the necessary tools that you need to craft it. I mean, that's the way that I would think, is that you would have a blacksmith who would craft weapons for you, but you just bring them all the items. So, do you have anything to add to that, Nate?
The only thing I can think of is it looks pretty. I agree. Like, I don't mind the smithy thing so much. I think the skill trees thing, to me, that was kind of like where I was kind of starting to cross the line a little bit. I think the smithy is a good idea. I like the idea of upgrading weapons, because that's been a precedent in Zelda for a long time. There's a lot of weapons that you get that's like, here's level 2 boomerang, here's level 2 whatever. So that's not been something that I think they've done it a lot, and I'd be cool to see another thing like that, especially now if they use it more of like, instead of level 2, it's level A1, whatever, so kind of like they did in Skyward Sword. Mm-hmm. Maybe not for everything, because that would be a little too overpowered, but something that kind of makes it like for weapons, like stuff that we have already that is degradable, like the shields and weapons, the bows and arrows, like that, I think would be great.
Yeah, and going back to the weapon degradation, I would have liked to see some sort of meter below the weapons that sort of tells you how the weapon is in terms of its durability. Instead of you not using the weapon for some time, and then you're going to fight a powerful enemy, and you swipe it once, and it says, "Oh, weapon is damaged."
Typically, when you pull it out, it'll tell you your weapon's close to being broken.
Well, I know, but even with that, then you'll have like an extra 3 or 4 hits before it truly breaks. So I would kind of wish that there was some sort of meter there that would sort of diminish as.
You know what's unfortunate? I think Skyward Sword actually had that meter.
With the shield, with the shield, yeah, with the shield.
But I mean, you go through that boss run, get the Hylian shield, and then that's indestructible. So.
Well, even in this game, the Hylian shield and the Master Sword are non-breakable, but they will eventually run out of charge time, and then you have to wait.
Yeah, and the Hylian shield, it can break, but it takes a long time for it to break.
Yes, so runs on magic battery juice.
I was really bummed out to find out that the Hylian shield can break, because like that's its thing, like it's the unbreakable like the dragon.
Now just use it for surfing.
At that point, I mean, I would have used it for shield surfing if it wouldn't break. That I would use all the time, but I wouldn't want my Hylian shield to break from shield surfing. So a lot of the times, I'm afraid to even use it. I just like to use it for show, just to have it on the back of Link. Just like, okay, look, I got the Hylian shield.
Put it up in your house.
Yeah, just kind of let it sit there on a wall. Or if I'm feeling nostalgic, just dress as like the Ocarina of Time Link or Twilight Princess Link and have that shield on hand. I guess going on from the content of the game, I suppose I would like to discuss the possible story. Because as I said before, I would like to see a direct sequel from Breath of the Wild, because I felt that there were some things that just weren't answered that I wanted to be answered, and they kind of alluded to the possibility of it carrying on from Breath of the Wild. The thing is, I just don't know where they would go from that, because to rebuild a kingdom that was so massive with just Link and Zelda and a bunch of scattered Hylians and, of course, Goron, Zors, and Rito and Gerudo, I wouldn't know how they could be able to make a game that focuses on the rebuilding of Hyrule.
I got it. Hyrule Minecraft.
Hyrule Minecraft.
I actually played this game recently, Dragon Quest Builders. It's basically like that, except it kind of tries to distance itself from Minecraft. So, there's a possibility there. Not necessarily a Zelda game per se, because that's definitely more building aspect than anything else.
I suppose.
Yeah. I think the one thing about this game, and this is kind of where the open world can kind of work against it, is that the story is pretty good if you go to find it. The problem with that is that they really try to keep it more open-ended, because if you can't be relying on finding cutscenes every so often where you get into points of the game, they can't really expect you to have this cutscene and then say, oh, by the way, you can go wherever you want. So I think that's kind of the hard part of it, is where do you toe the line of how much open world can we have and how much story do we have? Because I think Skyward Sword itself, I know we keep going back to that one, but that's a very story-driven story, and that's kind of why it is linear in a sense. That it's following the story pretty much verbatim as it goes on, which is why it tends to not be as open world. Whereas this one, if you don't want a story, you don't have to have one. You go fight Ganon. But if you do want to find the story, there's bits and pieces all over, which does lead to a lot of questions, because you're not going to really learn any of the story in the present. You're only going to learn it through the memories.
It just has the bulk of the story that's spread out, and that you just have to find it and watch the cutscenes. Actually, speaking of the cutscenes with the voice acting, I don't know about you guys, but I would kind of like to see voice acting being carried on to the next title, because I know that for a Zelda title, it's unheard of, and I know a lot of people freaked out about it when we saw the trailer. I kind of freaked out when I saw the trailer and heard Input talking for the first time. So I would like to see that carried on a bit further in the future Zelda titles. And as for Link talking, I'm still 50-50 on that. Should he still remain the silent protagonist, or should we give him a voice?
Well, I think I like how they did it. They imply that he talks.
Yeah.
In this, but they never show him doing that. And I think that's kind of the good middle ground, is like, he does say stuff, but you never hear it. So you yourself kind of can still keep the immersion
They kind
going.
of did that in Skyward Sword as well.
Yeah.
They give a plot reason for why he doesn't talk either. Like when you find Zelda's diary in the castle, and it's like, they actually give a reason, and I thought that was really cool that they addressed that canonically.
And I think for me, I like the voice acting because a lot of the voice actors they got were stellar. As much as he's a giant dick of a character, I love Rivali, and his voice actor revels in just having so much fun with that character. Like, if you got to like talk to that guy for a few minutes, you'd say that's probably one of his favorite characters like his voice so far, just because he got to have so much fun, and you get that kind of personality with it. And I think with the voice, you really can kind of get that more sarcasm or heroism in the case of Goron.
Yeah. Daruk.
Thank you. Daruk, and I think that really that adds to it, that you can't really get that kind of emotion when you're just reading text.
And well, speaking of the voice acting, I think my favorite actors would probably have to be the voices for Zelda and definitely Rivali. For some odd reason, I felt that the voices were out of place with Daruk and Urbosa.
Okay.
Because I just felt that Daruk is this big Goron. I felt that his voice should have been more booming, more commanding. I didn't really get that. I didn't really get that feeling with the voice that he already had. It wasn't bad by all means, but I felt that it should have been a lot deeper.
They're trying to go for this more jovial aspect.
Yeah. He's a jovial warrior, and he revels in that sort of warrior's pride type persona. So that was something I kind of wish.
Or you get scared of dogs.
Yeah, well, that was a touching little character development, that this giant Goron who can take down bokoblins with one swing is afraid of a dog. That was a nice little touch to his character. I guess in terms of the future of the story, whether it will continue directly after Breath of the Wild, or it'll go generations further beyond that, or hopefully not generations back, so I don't know how far back they can go at this point.
This is the first game in the timeline. Okay. This is the first game in the timeline. Okay. This is the first. Okay. Where's Breath of the Wild timeline? Some freaking far off, man. It's latest game in the timeline. Thank you.
Somewhere over there. Somewhere over there. But I feel now that at this point they should definitely add new villains. I would say, because at some point,
or utilize some of the cool ones that they haven't really done much with. Like, I like the concept of Vadi from Minish Cap, and it's like, okay, and I know he becomes the sorcerer dude in both Four Swords games, but it's like, well, Vadi as the Minish Cap Vadi is like, that's cool. Can you use him again? No. Okay.
Well, perhaps like villains that were somewhat like the villains in Oracle of Ages or Oracle of Seasons that we didn't really see much of in any other Zelda game.
It'd be cool to see them. I think the only problem with that is the Oracle games, those are both just servants of Ganon.
Okay, yeah. At some point, the new villain that we will see will be some sort of lapdog to Ganon, which I'm hoping for the next title it doesn't come to that, because Ganon's been beaten down to the ground so many times that it'd be interesting to see a new villain that sort of not necessarily takes his place, but sort of shows up before that process where Ganon would return. What do you think?
Yeah, like, I really love the DS games, and the DS games have original villains that have nothing to do with Ganon. I guess you could kind of argue that the Spirit Tracks is kind of a Ganon-ish entity, but it's not really, as far as I know. It'd be kind of cool to see more things like that, because it really does kind of add some more to the lore, as opposed to, oh yeah, it's Ganon again. And I think in this game, I liked how they handled it. It was just, Ganon is not this person anymore, he's just this force of evil. And I know some people disagree with that, but I kind of like that aspect of it now, is that he's become so beyond human that it's just this evil essence that now that we finally have it gone, maybe we'll get to see something even more, or kind of be born from that, because the whole concept of Ganon, going back to Skyward Sword, comes from demise, and demise now could be reincarnated into something new, and I think that'd be really cool to see.
Because he can basically manifest into any sort of entity that he would desire. Because I think the last human Ganondorf, I think, was Wind Waker, and
as far as the timeline goes, yeah. Or depending split timeline.
So if we go with that, it's possible that it's likely that we may not see Ganondorf again, which is kind of disappointing, because in Wind Waker, I felt that Ganondorf was probably he was a very well developed Ganondorf in Wind Waker.
For sure.
They gave him a lot more character to him, which I appreciate, because it's always nice to give the villain a purpose and a three-dimensional character rather than just being an antagonist you go and defeat. So I would like to see if they're going to either bring back Ganon or have a new villain who perhaps emulates Ganon's malice. I would like for that character to be not so much relatable, but just three-dimensional. Like, he has reasons for doing what he's doing, instead of just being, I'm evil, rawr.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to the whole concept of it. I mean, this is true of the Mario series too, or just kind of the older series that we've had for a long time. We just have these evil entities, and it's like, well, they're evil because that's the bad guy. That's kind of how it was. It goes back to the old fables, where it's like, go slay the dragon. Why? It's bad. So now that we're in this more depth storytelling now we can do with games, I think that'd be a lot cooler to see a lot of games that can really utilize further developed characters that you can kind of say, okay, I see where you're coming from, but you're wrong.
Yeah.
I got a little thought about that concept. In regards to like the whole open world too, a few games kind of imply a little bit of, like with Infamous, you have a little bit of a morality system going on with it. So if we were to apply a bit of the story, what if you were to play as a Link that eventually could either, depending on your choices, become the hero or become the new Ganon? And essentially you have a dynamic with someone he's probably related to. And eventually he becomes the final boss, either as the hero or the villain.
And I can already see how that could work, actually. You could have it that Link is destined to get either the Triforce of Courage or the Triforce of Power. You don't know which one. And depending on which choices you make will depend on which Triforce you get, and that's actually a really cool concept.
Yeah, I like that concept quite a bit, and hopefully Nintendo will shed some light on that, because I would certainly like to see that conflict and duality.
What if like, if you chose the evil path, Zelda becomes the final boss?
What a twist. That would be kind of a twist indeed. I don't know how that...
I'd go for it.
I'd have nothing wrong with that. That would definitely be a nice added original addition. So, yeah, I'd like that.
Maybe even just an entire game where the concept is Zelda's evil and you're helping Ganon defeat her.
But that doesn't work though, because usually she's always good, isn't
I
it?
know. Yeah. It's her legend.
Well, does anybody else have any questions? We're about to on our running time here.
Looks like time's up for the next one. It's time for the next one to get started here.
Yeah, so we'll wrap up right now. So does anybody have any questions before we close?
Something quick.
We can take the discussion outside.
Alrighty, well, thank you all for joining us. Once again, I'm Zach, and joining me has been Nate, and had a pleasure having this conversation with you, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.